Who does domestic abuse affect? A presentation put together for the KIDAS 2020 conference, Domestic Abuse, It's Everybody's Business. Domestic abuse occurs within lots of different sorts of relationships. It can occur between those who are partners or ex-partners, regardless of sexuality or gender, as well as in familial relationships, between family members, including adolescent to parent violence and so-called honour-based violence. This means that abuse could be coming from a partner or ex-partner. Within a current relationship, this could be a same-sex relationship, a marriage, long or short-term relationships, or casual partners. Or perhaps the abuse is coming from an ex-partner, where the relationship has ended, but abuse continues. Abuse also happens within familial relationships, regardless of whether you share the same household. This could be from parent to adolescent, adolescent to parent, sibling abuse, or from any other family member. Honour-based violence also happens within family structures. Honour-based violence is a collection of practices used to control behaviour within families in order to protect the perceived cultural and/or religious beliefs. You might think that domestic abuse only happens to some people. We may believe domestic abuse only affects women, only happens in new relationships, or affects some members of society more than others. But domestic abuse can happen to anyone. Domestic abuse affects everyone regardless of their sexuality or gender. True or false? Domestic abuse happens because of drug and alcohol, mental health, or background. False. None of these things cause domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is rooted in power and control. There are very specific tactics that are used with the intention of gaining power and control. All of these, substance misuse, mental health problems, childhood experiences, or stress, do not cause domestic abuse. They're an excuse. Research shows that domestic abuse is a deeply gendered issue and disproportionately affects women. For example, the Metropolitan Police statistics show that male violence against women made up 85% of reported domestic violence incidents. Domestic violence is characterised as patterned, repeated behaviour intended to assert power and control over the victim. Of those who experience 4 or more incidents of violence, 89% are women. However, that does not mean that men don't experience abuse. There are conflicting statistics, but we know that men can and do experience high-risk domestic abuse. Men and domestic abuse. Statistics from Mankind show that 576,000 men were victims of partner abuse during 2018 to 19. In 2017 to 18, 11% of male victims considered taking their own life due to partner abuse. Statistics indicate that half of male victims do not disclose abuse. And in 2018 to 19, 16 men were killed by their current or ex-partners. Refuge provision for men is severely limited. Men suffer many similar barriers to support, but may feel increased shame, feeling at fault, or being reluctant to seek help due to the social taboo of men's abuse. A lack of awareness about services can also put men off from reporting abuse and seeking help. Women and domestic abuse. 1.2 million women experienced domestic abuse between 2017 and 18. The average time in an abusive relationship was 3.5 years before seeking support. A woman will experience on average 35 abusive incidents before seeking support. 80 women were killed at the hands of a partner or ex-partner between 2017 and 18. Statistically, women between the ages of 20 and 24 are most at risk of domestic abuse. This report from the Crime Survey for England and Wales shows that women were more likely than men to be victims of domestic abuse in the last year. Domestic abuse doesn't discriminate. We know that it happens to all ages, races, religions, and genders, but there are different problems and different barriers for different people. Some problems that can be more prominent in some communities are control through immigration status, isolation and control through language and translation, forced marriage, honour-based violence, and female genital mutilation. Disabled women are twice as likely to experience domestic abuse than non-disabled women, and disabled men experience a similar rate of domestic abuse as non-disabled women. People with disabilities may also experience domestic abuse in wider context, from significant others, including intimate partners, family members, personal care assistants, and care professionals. Specific tactics of abuse can centre around the disability, where the abusive party would withhold, destroy, or manipulate medical equipment, access to communication, medication, personal care, meals, or transportation. The Sigma survey of gay men and lesbians suggested that 1 in 4 individuals in same-sex relationships experience domestic abuse at some time. These are similar figures to those for heterosexual domestic abuse against women. Abusers may use tactics based on sexual orientation or gender history to control and isolate a victim. It's important to remember that these tools are only effective because they occur in a broader context, where LGBT people may be marginalised or discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Research suggests that LGBT people's fears of experiencing homophobia or transphobia from services are a major barrier to seeking help. Lifetime experiences of discrimination around sexual orientation and gender identity impact on help seeking. Fear of discrimination from public bodies can have a real detrimental effect on the likelihood of a transgender person reporting abuse. Transgender people face greater isolation and can be particularly at risk of having their gender used as a method of control, emotionally, or by exerting control through the fear of being publicly shamed or outed by a partner. Age. Domestic violence is often portrayed as something that happens to younger women. Older women's experiences can be put under the category of elder abuse. Older victims experience abuse for twice as long before seeking help as those aged under 61, and nearly half have a disability. Yet older clients are hugely underrepresented amongst domestic abuse services. There are significant barriers for older people seeking support. For instance, they're more likely to worry about their independence, losing financial control, leaving a lifetime home, being placed into care, and the reaction of adult children. They can also feel ashamed or at fault for the abuse. It can be compounded if the abuse has been happening for a very long time, or if the abuse has started in a new relationship started later in life. This chart from the Crime Survey for England and Wales shows that women aged 20 to 24 years old were more likely to be victims of domestic abuse than any other woman. Despite this, we need to take into account how likely victims are to come forward to the police. So who does domestic abuse affect? It can affect absolutely anyone. This presentation was produced by Lookahead and Oasis Domestic Abuse Service for the KIDAS Domestic Abuse, It's Everybody's Business conference.